There we go. We're at the Mishnah on Pehei Amid Beis.
No,
No?
we're on Pei-Vav, Amid Aleph.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What are
we up to?
We got to Pei-Vav, Amid Aleph with the Hagana B'nai.
Okay. Pei Vav Amid Aleph. Yeah, 7 lines down from the top of Pei Vav Amid Aleph. Yeah, right. Hagoynev es B'nai. One who, so we said that someone who, we said a machlokes in the Mishnah on the previous Amud between Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shmuel ben Oshia, Rabbi Yechon Broika says, Yichayev v'chamse yipater. My time of the Rabbanan. What's the reason for the Rabbanan that they say when someone steals his own son, that the Rabbanan say yipater? Amar Abayda, Amar Krok, ki yimtze, ki yimotze. What's the pasuk? Ki yimotze ish goynev nefesh me'achav b'bnei Yisrael. When someone is found who to steal nefesh me'achav, one of his brothers, Saktumara, so prat lemotzi. It says ki yimotze. That means that it has to be that he goes out and he finds someone, but it can't be someone that's easily accessible to him, that's already under his jurisdiction, so to speak. So his son is already within his orbit, so it's not considered that he went out and found someone and kidnapped him. So it's so strange. It's just like, it's such an interesting, such a relevant distinction, because you often find the most common, kidnapping is very common in the United States. And about 98% of the time, it's a former spouse who doesn't have custody. And the Gemara is saying that is not kidnapping. It's not what we're talking about when we talk about kidnapping that you get misa for. Amalei Rapapa Labaya Alamiata Kimotza Ish Sheichav Im Isha Bulas Baal. The Isser to be born in Ashes Ish. Morning or fall. The pasuk says Kimotza Ish Sheichav Ish Im Isha Bulas Baal. It also uses the lashon of Kiyamotza. Hachanami Kiyamotza Prat Lamotzi. That would also exclude someone who is around, who is accessible. Ben Shabbai is planted the Shchichin Gabayu, like a certain place, a certain family that they used to have multiple couples living together. You would say that if someone's born the Ashes Ish over there, he'd be Potter. I says it can't be. Adarabba, it's not ideal that people live couples together. They shouldn't get off the hook because of it. Amalei Anam even Nimtza Biyadu on Pei Vav and Aleph, about 12 lines, 15 lines down. He says no, it's because it says it says it twice. It says Ki Yimotze, and then it says V'Nimtza Biyadu. So for the repetition, the redundancy, that's how I know to learn to exclude Motze, to exclude if he kidnaps his own son. Amar Rava says Helkachani Mikri Dardiki, the people who teach children, Umasnu Rabbanan, the people who teach to Rabbanan, Kamitzuyim Biyadi Dami, they're considered to be Motzi in their hands, Uptiri, and if they were to kidnap them, they would be Pater. I was thinking maybe this means, I don't know if you remember back in your 10th grade, and the Rebbe, it was time, the bell rang, and it was time to go to lunch, and the Rebbe kept on darshaning. The question is, should we mechuyev as a kidnapper? He's restraining you against your will. So that's what the Gemara is telling you. He's not going to be chayiv for that. The only reason why this joke occurred to me is because I don't know what the purpose of this Gemara is. We're saying that these people we're giving another example of a matzah. In addition to a son, we're saying a student is also a matzah. But why can't it be an employee, or why can't it be any other kind of person who you're around regularly? I'm not sure what the standards are, what the parameters are. So we had a second machlokes in the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, if someone kidnaps someone who is half a slave and half free, Yehuda says Yechayev, even though he's half an Evet. As we're going to see, a full Evet, everyone agrees, there's no din of goin of nefesh, but Chatzi Evet, we're going to say he is going to be mechayev. So Yehuda says Chayev, and the Chum say no, he's going to be pater since he's partially an Evet. Nanas, Yehuda in lavodim boishes. Yehuda says avodim are not subject to the din of boishes. My time with the Yehuda. Where does he get this from? And this is going to bring us back to this din of Chatzi Evet Chatzi Ben Chayrin in a minute. What's the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Amakra ki yinatu anashim yachtav ishva achiv. The pasuk says when two people are fighting with one another, ishva achiv bekarva eishes echad lahatzel etz isha, and the wife of one of them comes to save her husband. Yad makev from the man who's hitting him. V'shelcha yadav v'chzika b'mehushav, and he grabs him and he's mevayish him. He grabs him in a very derogatory, humiliating way. That's the din of baishas. So, but the Gemara darshans, we darshan, Misha Yeshli Achva. It says, Yachtav Ishva Achiv. So it says only someone that there's Achva with, it's someone that you can be brothers with him. Yotza Evet Shein Li Achva. An Evet cannot marry together. He can't be included in families. He's also to marry a Jew. So he's not able to be a relative to us. So Evet is excluded from the din of Baishas. Rabbanan, Achiv hu b'mitzvahs. Rabbanan say no. When the pasuk says Achiv, it doesn't exclude an Evet. Now it's not like you said. It depends on whether he can become family with us. It depends on whether he's our brother that he has mitzvahs, and an Evet does have mitzvahs. He has all the mitzvahs that an Isha has. He has to go to shul every Pasha Zachar. V'hacha Heichi Darish. And so that's as far as Baishas. What about our din about Evet? How are we going to darshan? How will the din of Avdus apply in the din of Goin of Nefesh? The pasuk says, "Ki imotza ish goin of nefesh me'echav, achiv." So, echav, someone who steals from amongst his brothers, that excludes avodim. Avodim are not echav, which is the same as he had said by Baishas, that he says echav excludes avodim because avodim are not able to be intermarry with us. Bnei Yisrael lemutei mishachachi eved v'chachi ben chayrin. The pasuk says, in addition to saying echav, it says me'echav mibnei Yisrael, which is again a redundancy. So what is it saying? So it's that's coming to exclude an additional exclusion. So we say that that's the next step. That's even someone who's not even a full eved, even if he's a chatzi eved v'chachi ben chayrin, there's not going to be a din of goyin of nefesh. And then it says, it doesn't just say Bnei Yisrael, it says Mi Bnei Yisrael. That's a third exclusion. That's again being mamayit the same thing. If we have two miyutim, so it's coming to include. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda will say, you're actually going to be chayiv for misha chatzi eved v'chatzi ben chayr, because we have two miyutim to exclude chatzi eved v'chatzi ben chayrin. It's mirach hamiyat, so then it ends up including it. The Rabbanan don't darshan like Rabbi Yehuda because they start a step further. May achav lafuke avadim loy mashmalu the achav hu b'mitzvahs. Like we said, as far as baishas, when it says echav, that doesn't exclude avadim because avadim are considered echav because they're together with us with mitzvahs. But then we have Bnei Yisrael, Mibnei Yisrael. We have two additional miyutim, Chad Lamutei Eved, B'Chad Lamutei, B'Chad Misha Chatzi Eved, B'Chatzi Ben Chayrin. So the first extra, the second one that Rabbi Yehuda used is really the first for the Rabbanan. That tells you Chatzi Eved, that tells you an Eved himself is excluded. And the second one is excluded, Chatzi Eved, B'Chatzi Ben Chayrin. So you don't have at all, you never have Shnei Ksuna Banka Echad, or I'm sorry, Mirach Hamiyat, El Rabbis. Zok the Gemara. As Hara Lagoin of Nefesh Minayin. we see that the pasuk says what happens. It says what the einish is, but as we've seen, as is the rule throughout Shas, it's not sufficient to say what the punishment is. We have to have a place where the Torah tells you that you're not allowed to do it. You need a azhar, you need a lav, you need the pasuk to say directly, don't do it. So where is the azhara? Yeshia says, from the word loy signiv, those should be familiar to you. Hopefully you saw it. I don't know if they still have this, but in the old days it was on top of every Aron Kodesh. It said Aser Sadibris. So one of the Aser Sadibris is loy signiv. And that refers to Goin of Nefesh. Rabbi Yochanan says it comes from the words lo yimcharu mimkaras eved. You shouldn't sell him as an eved. You can't sell a yid as an eved. The loy pligi, and it's not a machlokes. Marka chashav lav de gneva. One is talking about the lav that you're not allowed to steal him, the kidnapping. Or marka chashav lav de mechira. The other one is talking about the lav that you can't afterwards sell him. Like we saw in the previous Amud, there are two factors, two separate elements that are necessary for the Isser of Gnevus Nefesh. First of all, you have to kidnap him, and then you have to sell him. There's actually a third element, but the third element is not a distinct element. It's just it's a factor in how it's done. It means when you kidnap someone, you also have to make use of him. But it's not a separate lav. It's not a separate lav for that. That's just one of the tnoim of how you do it. So Dr. Rabba, Dr. Umar, Ton Rabba, loy signav. The Torah says loy signav in the Aseret said, "But begoin of nefashah hakasam adav." Ata im begoin of nefashah saying el begoin of mammon. We read it as kids. We read the Aseret said, but we assume when it says loy signav, it means you're not allowed to steal. It means you can't steal money. Maybe that's taka the truth. Maybe it only means stealing, regular monetary stealing. One of the, we have to use the 13 midas that we use to learn the Torah. You have to look at the context in which a mitzvah is given or a lav is given. What are the rest of the Aser Sadibus talking about? Benefashos. These are all things that are capital punishments, right? It's talking about leisirtzach, leisinaf. So these are all things that are you get killed for. That there's a person gets misa b'dei adam. Avkam benefashos. Tani, another brayso which attacks it from the other end. Leisignoivu, the pasuk that talks about the isser of stealing money. It's talking about someone who steals money. How do I know it's talking about stealing money? Maybe it's talking about someone who kidnaps a person. You have to learn each thing from its context, from what's surrounding it. The pasuk is talking about things that are mominous, like it says, you can't defraud your friend. So afkan b'mammon, so too over here, when loisignoivu is not talking about like an aser sadibris of going of nefesh, but rather it's talking about stealing money from your person, from another person. Itmar. Eide gneva ve'eide mechira b'nefesh shehuzmu. What if you have Eide Gneva? This, like we said, there are two parts of stealing, of kidnapping. First is when you kidnap the person, and the second part is then you sell him to someone else. So these Eidim, you have Eidim on the Gneva. You have two separate Eidim. One Eid that says we saw him being stolen, and the second Eid that saw that he was being sold into slavery. Shehuzmu. And those Eidim were Huzam. At this point, we're assuming the Gemara is going to, Rav Papa is going to argue about this, but at this point, we're assuming that both Eidim, sets of Eidim, were Huzam. And we're talking about both of them. Chizkiya Amar, Einer Ragan. Chizkiya says they can't get Misa. And because they can't get Misa, that means that their edus, if you have two separate edus, an edus on the theft and an edus on the sale, the person's not going to get misa for it. Why not? Well, we'll see in a minute why not. Because it's going to be considered two separate edus. Rabbi Yechon Amar Nerogin. Rabbi Yechon says you are ner. Chizki de Amar Rabbi Kiva the Amar Davar v'lechatzi Davar. Chizkiya, who says that there ain't nerogin when you have separate edus on the mechira and separate edus on the geneva, because he holds like Rabbi Kiva, who says when you have edim coming to say something, they have to say the entire edus. You can't split up an edus into two parts. To make it more understandable, for example, let's say someone kills someone, and one person saw him swinging, and one person saw the beginning of the swing, and the other person saw the second half of the swing. I guess it's not the best analogy, but it means you have to see an entire action, an entire chelik of what the person is doing. And over here, you split it into two parts. So each part is not a sufficient. You can't have the edus split into two parts, and therefore, first of all, he's not going to be the person who kidnapped is not going to be chayiv because the edus is invalid, and therefore, obviously, if they're not going to be able to become edim zayvim on it because what they said the edus was not enough to convict him. So that's the way Chizkiya says, and he's saying like Rabbi Kiva. Yochanan says like the Rabbanan. Rabbi Yochanan who says that they are nerogin, he says like the Rabbanan who say you could even say a chatzi davar. It doesn't make a difference. You can have edim on each part, and that's enough to convict him, and that's enough for the edim then to become edim zayin. Zok the Gemara, umoide Chizkiya be'edim ha'achroinim shel ben sayru u'mayra shehuzmu shenerogim. He says even though Chizkiya said that you can't have a chatzi davar in the context of kidnapping, where you have one aide saying that he was kidnapped and then another aide saying that he stole him, but this we would not apply the same theory by a ben sayru u'mayra. By a ben sayru u'mayra, the way it works is you first have aidim. We had this couple. We had the parak of ben sayru u'mayra that he has to be first. They have to be aidim come and say that he stole from his parents and he used that money to buy meat, and they come and they say this, and he gets malchus, and then they have to go. He has to go ahead and be a recidivist. He has to go and do it again, and on the second time he becomes a ben sayru u'mayra. So maybe you'd say if you have separate aidim on the first time he stole, and then a different pair of aidim that come on the second time, maybe that's also a chatzi davar, and you should not be chayiv. Zok the Gemara, no. On that, Chizkiya is maida, even though Chizkiya said davar v'chal chatzi davar, he's maida on the second pair of aidim by ben sayru u'mayra shehuzmu shenerogim, that they're going to be able to convict him, and therefore, if they say edus that this is the second time that we saw him stealing from his parents, and that he had previously been found to have stolen from his parents, that he gets killed. Because it's very different over there. The first Edom that saw that he stole from his parents, based on that Edus, the Ben sayru u'mayra gets malchus. So the first Edom can say, we were only coming to give him malchus. We had no intention of affecting him that he should eventually become Ben sayru u'mayra. If it happens, it happens. It's still a valid testimony. And if another pair of Edom will come and say on the second time that he did it, they're going to be able to convict him to make him become a Ben sayru u'mayra. But our Edus was a complete Edus in and of itself because it caused him to get malchus. So, the second pair of Edom was saying an entire Edus to get him to become a Papa Yachi. The Edom Mechira should also get malchus, meaning in the case of a kidnapping of a goyin of nefesh, let's also say there's a second pair of Edom that only saw the second part that he sold him into slavery should also get killed. We were just trying to get him to get Malchus for what we said. Why don't we make the same distinction? Say that the Eidim Rishonim that saw him being kidnapped, they could say we were only saying it. We had no idea that he was going to sell him later on. We were just trying to get him to be Mechayiv and Malchus. The Gemara says, how do we know that there is such a thing that you get Malchus for just saying Eidus? The only thing we know, so far all we've seen, is that we know that the Torah requires that if someone kidnaps a person and then sells him into slavery, that he gets killed. But where do we see that there's a separate Malchus for just doing the first part, for just kidnapping someone without the selling into slavery? So maybe Chizkiah holds that you don't get Malchus just for kidnapping. Boy, it can't be. We have a discussion between. We have a brisa that says this. Eide gneva benefesh shehuzmu. I'm sorry, we have not a Mishnah. We have this machlokes already brought down. Edim that saw that a man was kidnapped, and then they became Edim Zaymim. Chizkiah v'Rabbi Yochanan chad amar loikim v'chad amar ein loikim. One of between Chizkiah and Rabbi Yochanan, one says he gets Malchus just for seeing the actual Geneva, for the actual kidnapping, without the Mechira. And one says, no, there's no Malchus on it. V'amrina, this time the Chizkiah, the Amaloikin. Chizkiah is the man who says you do get Malchus. With the Amar Chizkiah ain't erogin. Since Chizkiah, like we said in the earlier Machlokes, says that the second pair of Edim, we said that the Edim who saw him that he stole, if you have separate Edis on the Geneva and separate Edis on Mechira, they don't get killed. The Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that they still are subject to Misa, even though in their Ragin have Leishnit and Lazar Misas Bezdin. B'chol Lav Shendin Lazar's Misas Bezdin ain't like an Allah. The rule is if there's a lav, if there's a Isser Karas, and we're not able to apply the din of Karas, so then we would give Malchus. But it doesn't apply, but by something that is a Mises Bezdin. If someone kills someone, and we're not able to apply the Isser Misa, because for whatever reason, for some technical reason, he doesn't get, let's say they gave him Azhara, let's say the Edim gave him Asra, they're going to get Malchus. There's no such thing as downgrading from Misa to a Lav. So he's saying this, so this is the same thing. According to Rabbi Yochanan, since the Mechir itself is capable of causing him to be Mechuyev Misa, so therefore it can't be that it's instead going to be Mechuyev Malchus. But to Chizkiah, who holds Ein Erogin, he could say there's a Chiyav Malchus just for the Geneva. So the Gemara. So if the kidnapper himself, according to Rabbi Yochanan, according to Chizkiah, we said is like it. Eidei Mechira. Why did we say before that since the first Eidim can say that we were just trying to bring Malchus, so now how could we say that according to Chizkiah, since he holds that there is a Chi of Malchus, so it should be that the first pair of Eidim can say that we were coming to be Mechuyev on him a Chi of Malchus. If he himself, the person who's trying to give the Malchus, who's trying to steal him, who stole him, who was a kidnapper, is not getting Malchus, they themselves, how could they get Malchus? Zakt Gemara. Ella Amar Papa. So the Papa says we have to understand differently the original member that we had said on Amid Allah. That which we said, which we had understood to mean that both the Eidim, where we had to split up the Eidus. One Eidus said about that the person was kidnapped, and the other one said he was sold into slavery. and Chitzkiya said they don't get killed, and Rabbi Yochanan said they do get killed. The Papa says, they were not talking about the Eidei Mechir. When we say, when there was a machlokes between Chizkiya and the Rabbanan about whether he gets killed, that was not talking about the Eidei, Mechira, the second pair of Eidim. Everyone will say that they've concluded the Eidus that caused him to get killed, and on the first part, you could say that that was a separate Eidus because they're coming to say about whether he gets Malchus. He pleaded Eidei Geneva, but they're arguing about the Eidei Geneva, the Eidim on the first part, on the kidnapping. Chizkiya says he doesn't get Malchus. Like we said, he could get Malchus, but he doesn't get killed. He says there could be two separate Eidos, and he's saying Eidos that would get him to get Malchus, and it's not necessarily, he's saying I was just trying to get him to get Malchus, and I'm not intending to get him killed. So therefore the second Eidos is a separate thing. Yochanan says no, the two things are tied together. He holds that the first Eidos would not be mechuyev in Malchus. It's the beginning of the second Eidos, and therefore he holds in addition, which truthfully Rabbi Chizkiya could hold the same thing, that you need dava v'leichatzi. You don't need dava v'leichatzi dava. He doesn't hold of that dava v'leichatzi dava. So therefore, even though you don't have the Eidei Mechira are separate, you could still have each one saying their Eidus on their part. So the second, the Eidei Mechira, could be Mechuyev Misa. However, Rabbi Yochanan will be Moide Beidim Rishon Shaben Sairu Meira Shehuzmu Shein Erogin. However, in the case of Ben Sairu Meira, which we had compared to the case of Gainav Nefesh, and we had said Ben Sairu Meira Shehuzmu that the Eidim Rishonim are not Nerag. In that case, they could say we're coming to give him Malchus. There's no Malchus, like we saw. We brought the machlokes, Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiya. He says there's no Malchus on the Eidei Geneva by a Gainav Nefesh. Abaye sort of sums this up. Amar Abaye, Hakol Moedim Ben Sairu Meir, Hakol Moedim Ben Sairu Meir, Umachlokes Ben Sairu Meir. There's one point that everyone agrees by Ben Sairu Meir, and there's one part, the second thing that everyone agrees on Ben Sairu Meir, and there's one thing that they argue about. Hakol Moedim Ben Sairu Meir Beidim Rishayim Shein Erogin. Everyone agrees on the original Eidim, the Eidim that said the first Eidus of a Ben Sairu Meir. That at that point he obviously nothing. The second part of him being a Ben Sairu Meir second time hadn't happened yet. They could just say we have no intention. We weren't saying anything about him getting killed. So now when we are found out to be Eidim Zaymim, there's no reason to kill us. We're just coming to say Eidus about him getting Malchus. And everyone agrees about that. Everyone agrees there's Malchus the first time. The only machlekes before was in the case of Gainav Nefesh, was the machlekes Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan about whether you get Malchus the first time. And everyone agrees on the second pair of Eidim that he was, when he stole a second time Ben Sairu Meir, that they get killed. The Eidim Zayim get killed. Because the first Eidim can say we were entirely separate. We were just saying Eidus on Malchus. So now the second pair of Eidim is doing the entire thing, and they certainly, even if you hold Dava v'lechatzi Dava, this is not a Chatzi Dava because the first Eidim are distinct. Well, machlokes Ben Sairu Meir, and the machlokes, there's going to be a machlokes Ben Sairu Meir. Shnayim Ayim b'Fneinu Ganav, u'Shnayim Ayim b'Fneinu Acham. If the actual Maisa, that means each time that the Ben Sairu Meir gets Malchus, the first time he gets Malchus and the second time he does it gets killed, there are two elements to it. First of all, he has to steal from his parents, and then he has to eat the meat and the wine. So if you have two separate Eidim on that, if that's split into part, that's going to be a machlokes because it's going to depend on the machlokes of whether you say Dava v'lechatzi davar, whether you hold like Rabbi Akiva, Chizkiya says like Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yochanan doesn't. Amar Ravasi, Edim Mechira Benefesh Huzmu, Edim Mechira, Edim that would just Edim on the Mechira. They just saw him speak that the kidnapper sold the victim into slavery, but he was not Adis, there was no Adis at that point on the original kidnapping. Ein Erogan, they don't get Riga. He could say, all I was saying is that Reuben sold Shimon. I didn't know that Shimon was a Yid who was kidnapped. I thought he was a Eved Knani. Rav Yosef, Kaman Azal Hashmaitz Dervasi, Kirakiva the Amad Dava Lechatzi Dava. He says this must hold like Rabbi Kiva says Dava Lechatzi Dava, since he's only saying on the second part. He's only saying on half of the situation. Amle Abaya. The Ikar Abban Narogin, you're saying it's only because he holds like Rabbi Kiva. The Bryce itself had said, I'm sorry, not the Bryce, I keep saying that. The Memra had said the reason is it's nothing to do with Davar V'Lechatzi Davar. It's because he could say, I did not realize I was speaking about someone who was kidnapped. I thought I was talking about someone, I was saying a purely commercial transaction. I was saying that I saw this Reuben selling Shimon, but I thought Shimon was Eved Knani. So he has a claim of innocence altogether. It's not just because he's saying a Chatzi Davar, there's Edom Zayim. I didn't realize he wasn't intending to kill him. We're talking about, we're saying even according to Rabbanan, and we're talking about where Edig Neva never came. And that's the reason why he could say Mitoich. If that's the case, what's the chiddush? If you never had Eidei Gneva, obviously you can't cause the Eidei Mechira to be killed when there was never a possibility. He would never had the potential of causing the kidnapper to be killed. You need both Eidei Mechira and Eidei Gneva, and there was no Eidei Gneva. We're talking about where after the Eidei Mechira said their Eidis, later on Eidei Gneva came that showed that the person that they was testifying was sold was originally kidnapped. But it's still, how could he be mechuyev for something that happens after he said his Eidus? There was no potential, he had no reason to believe what he was doing should be mechuyev, would be mechayev, the person he was saying the Eidus about, Misa, who's still missing the Gneva. So we're talking about where the Eidei, they were communicating with winks and nods. The Eidei Gneva were sitting there, and they were indicating to the Eidei Mechira, we're about to jump in and say there's going to be aid that he was stolen. Mal de Temer Remiza Milsi. I might say, since they had some sort of knowledge that there were additionally Eidei Gneva that would complete the testimony and cause the kidnapper to be killed, and that should be enough. Kamashmal and Remiza Lav Klamu. So it comes to tell you that no, Remiza just indicating is not enough to convict someone. Moving on to a different din. Zaken Mamre, an elder, which really means a person who's on a bezdin, Mamre, who rebels, al pi bezdin. He also gets, we said in the previous mission, he gets chenek. And now we're going through the different nechnokin. So what is this case of someone who, a Zaken Mamre, a Zaken who rebels, which is really a very specific case, as we're going to see, of a member of a bezdin who refuses to accept the psak of the Sanhedrin. Shenema, ki yipolim chadavar la mishpat. When something is difficult for you, or it's far away from you, you can't figure out what the halacha is. And the Mishnah is going to explain what the case is. There were three bezdins in Yerushalayim. Echad Yoshev al Pesach Harabayis. One was by the entrance to the Harabayis. Echad Yoshev al Pesach Hazara, and one was by the entrance to the Azara of the Beis Hamikdash. Echad Yoshev Belishkas Hagazis. And then finally, the bezdin, the Sanhedrin of Shimon ve'Echad, the bezdin Hagadol sat in the Lishkas Hagazis. Ba'an Lezesh al Pesach Harabayis. So then you have this case where there was a bezdin in one of the local Batei Dinim, and they had a case that came to them, and they couldn't come to a conclusion. They didn't know what the halacha was. And they come to the outside, the first of the three Batei Din. This is what we we were able to deduce with our drushes by trying to figure out the halacha. And this is what I was told by my Rebbeim. This is what they were told. Their Rebbeim told them. So what they would go to the bed and they'd say, what is taka the din? What is the correct halacha? Im Shamai, if that bezdin had heard what the halacha was, amalahem, they would tell them what the halacha is. Bim lav, but if they don't, you go appeal to the next highest, the second inner sanctum bezdin, the bezdin that was by the entrance to the azara. Im shamu amar, if that bezdin had heard Allah, they tell them, Im lav, elu ve'elu boin lebezdin hagadol. They all go to the bezdin, the Sanhedrin hagadol, shabalishk sagazis, the bezdin of 71. Shemenu yoytze Torah l'chol Yisrael, that they're the final arbiter of the halacha. Shneimanu hakum hahu asher yibcha Hashem. Chazer li'iroi. So they tell them, this is the halacha, and this is what you have to do. Chazer li'iroi. So then the original local bezdin goes back to their own city. Shanav alamid shahir alamid. If the recalcitrant judge on that the dayan on that bezdin, he goes and says, he teaches everyone. I heard what the three bezdins in Yerushalayim said, but I think this is the right pshat in the halacha. Potter, he's potter. He's not a zaken mamre because all he did was teach people. But however, if he said it's not just that he's teaching halacha, as a drasha, but if he paskins halacha lemaisa connected what the bezin hagadol says, then he's going to be chayiv as a zaken mamre. He's going to be chayiv misa. The pasuk, this is the pasuk of the zaken mamre. He doesn't listen to the shayfet. There's a chiyuv misa for someone who refuses to submit to the bezin hagadol, to the psak. So it says and he has to do something. Until he makes a hayra to do, just teaching the halacha to negate this and Sanhedrin hagadol is not going to be chayiv misa. Time jahir lasas potter. The Mishnah concludes. By the way, this is only relevant to a dayan on the bezin, on the local bezin. But if he's just a talmud and someone we saw, I think this refers to we saw before that there are certain circumstances under which a talmud can say a svara and he could be elevated to the bezdin. So if a talmud just said a svara, but he's not a mumcha to be part of the bezdin, and he paskins not like the bezdin. Someone asks him what the halacha is, and he paskins not like the Sanhedrin. He's not going to get the chiyuv misa. It's only the zaken.
Let me add. So you went to the Sanhedrin and then what happened?
They paskin. They said this is the psak. This is the final din that you have to send the deported terrorists back to the United States. That means both sides of the argument. That means there's this one zaken who's arguing with everyone else on his own bezdin. All 23 of them. This is a bezdin shel nefashos. We're not talking about mamnis. They go to the bezdin hagadol. They present their argument about what the halach is, and the Sanhedrin paskins. And that's it. That's the end. That's the final psak.
You don't know who they pass like
doesn't make it. Well, no, obviously they pass against that single one.
It's funny they skip that whole part. Fine.
Right. Because it could be 9. It could be 11 against 12. It could be 10 against 13. They're having a discussion, but there's just one of them who later on goes and is stubborn, and paskins not like it. Right, so it doesn't make a difference really which side they came on. It's one of the people who lost on the side that lost sticks to their guns. So we say that the Rabbi Talmud, since he's at a lower level, he's not going to be considered zaken mamre. So we find that the fact that he is going to come out a kula since he's not so hooked in. Okay, I have to stop over here because I have to.